Peter Credlin has pointed out that one of the jarring aspects of the AUKUS submarine announcement is that nuclear power is now considered by the Australian government to be all right for Australia to have at sea, but not all right to have on land. And that leads into our next audience question is, how long can we expect the memorandum on nuclear energy to be lifted?
Well, I suspect not just the government, but all political parties have been surprised by the post-AUKUS announcement public opinion polls in terms of the breadth and depth of support for at least considering, if not moving to acquiring, a civilian nuclear energy capability. It certainly caught me by surprise. And if you go back to Tony Abbott's explanation of why we didn't opt for the nuclear propulsion back in 2015, 2016, one of the arguments was the government didn't think that the public would wear that. And therefore there was not the resolve or any constituency in the party and the government for trying to to overturn the legislation that bars that. I think it's a logical inconsistency. I think it is possible and logically consistent to say we will go for nuclear propulsion and nuclear energy across the broad front, but not cross over into nuclear weapons. After all, a lot of countries have civilian nuclear capability, including Japan and South Korea that we are talking about, but don't have nuclear weapons. But it's odd for the country that has a third of the world's known uranium reserves, which we are prepared to mine and export to bomb-possessing countries, but we won't allow that for ourselves. There are other arguments that will need to be considered. Now, I'm dead set against government subsidy to industry for all sorts of things, but we subsidize renewables. I'll be all in favor of letting market forces decide the mix of energy in our total portfolio, because there are many, many, many advantages to nuclear energy. And under modern conditions, if the economics work out by market forces, which is a big if, but if the economics work out, I really don't have any significant fears on their safety record of the modern designs and the safeguards that we can sign on to that reflect international best practice for that. So I think it's something that we need to consider. And if this opens the way to a broader civilian nuclear energy exploration by Australia, I think, to my mind, that's another argument in favor of AUKUS, because it breaks through that psychological barrier that we've had that has denied ourselves potentially the most helpful source of energy as we try to move towards cutting emissions. It is the cleanest energy. Its footprint in terms of the land area required is very small compared to renewables, etc. So there are many advantages to that, and it would be good to consider that in detail, authoritatively, rather than rule it out in principle, or because we still have hang-ups from the past about various aspects of it. Remembering also, of course, that we are the most geologically stable continent.
I find that a very interesting statement, because you're the director of the Centre for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament at the Crawford School. So you can be in favour of nuclear power, but also not being in favour of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of countries that have nuclear power that are members in very good standing of the NPT, and they have not gone down the nuclear weapons path. Were never suspected of going down the nuclear weapons path. I mean, lots of European countries that have had nuclear power and still have nuclear power, they began to step back from it after the Fukushima disaster in Japan. But I was never in favor of nuclear reactors in Japan, by the way. You have 3 different geographical fault lines. That's a very earthquake-prone country. I don't know how many minor to moderate earthquakes I experienced in the decade I was living there. And it was never a good idea to have nuclear reactors sited there. You are inviting trouble. New Zealand, similar as well in terms of the fault line it runs through. I wouldn't like the idea of nuclear power reactors in other countries that are prone to those things. But we are a stable country. It may be we decide not against it for other reasons. As I said, the price is very important. I would not support any government subsidy to the nuclear power industry, and the timeline and cost may be such that private sector may say it's not worth it. We are not going to do it. That's a different issue. But in terms of signing on to existing international safeguards, agreements with the International Atomic Energy Agency, designing the reactors with these safety and security and safeguards issues in mind, no, in itself, I don't think it has any significant weapons proliferation concerns at all.
The leader of the Australian Greens, Adam Bant, said that the decision is one of the worst security decisions for Australia in decades because it is dangerous and will result in floating Chernobyls. What are your thoughts on that comment?
I think it reflects his ignorance more than anything else. I mean, it is a complete nonsensical statement. Come on. We have had what? Over 2 million kilometers of travel by nuclear powered submarines by the American Navy since the first was commissioned way back in the mid-50s, I think. I forget how many, 5,500 hours of reactor hours of operation or something, and no major problem. It's, I mean, come on, how many people in the world in the decades since we have operated nuclear power reactors for civilian use, how many people have died from a nuclear power accident? There's many more people have died from ordinary electricity. It's a concern, but it's not a concern. Or let me put it this way. How many Australians, when they travel to France or want to travel to France, think, oh no, 70% of its energy for electricity comes from nuclear power. That's too dangerous. I'm not going to go. Do you know of a single person who's made a decision on that basis? So, I have personal safety fears and issues when I visit family in India, but it's not due to the fact that X% of their nuclear power or their power comes from nuclear power. It's other issues. It's not a real issue as far as I know, for anyone deciding whether they're going to go to X country or not. So it's a big beat up, and there's no rational basis to that. Now, of course, the other side to that is individually, I've found people who claim to be environmentalists very hard to take if they have an ideological opposition to nuclear power as well. Because for a long time, provided you meet the other safeguards and security issues, nuclear power is an answer to environmental problems rather than worsening environmental problems. It doesn't mean that you just go in with a casual attitude, but provided the design factors, the safety precautions, the accident alert systems, the surveillance monitoring systems, these are met, it's a manageable risk. Well, life is all about risk. If you're that risk averse, as the COVID thing has shown us, maybe you should not have been born in the first place.